Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. In the previous episode, we got our engine in the engine bay finally after probably about a year now. Since I've pulled out the engine out of the Honda Accord Euro. Up next is actually the intake manifold. And as you guys know, we're on a budget, so I've gone with this eBay intake manifold. So one of these manifolds will run you about maybe $200 AUD, maybe a little bit more, but I've decided to go with an eBay throttle body as well, so that will set you a little bit higher. Just before we get into any detail, if you're new here, please subscribe. As I said before, this is a very cheap intake manifold, so it requires a few modifications, but before we get into that, we'll compare it to the old PRB one. So the RBC style intake manifold from Honda is the best for creating power, as it has the best flow. This is a replica, and the one just below it I believe is the PRB, which is on this Honda Accord Euro. Differences between the two is that's smaller and this one is a lot bigger, and it has the long runners and they're not as wide, so this one has more flow than this one. Also, this RBC style replica is better fitting for the chassis as it is a lot smaller and it has the better bend for the clearance for the bonnet. On this newer style intake manifold, I'm going to be running a different style fuel rail and deleting this valve here. This valve here is used to promote the warming up of the vehicle from a cold start. I'm not going to use that, so I'm going to delete it as it's not necessary for the swap. So now that we're done comparing the two, we can get rid of the old one. Obviously, this being a cheap intake manifold from eBay, you have a few problems you need to sort out. First of all, they drilled the injector holes a bit too small, so all you got to do is drill them out to the next size, which I believe is a 14 metric. Very smartly, they put a thread where the mass sensor goes, just in case you have a mass sensor on your throttle body, which sits here, so you can put a bolt in there. But obviously we don't have that on our new throttle body, so we're going to be drilling that out and then putting our mass sensor here on the intake manifold. Also, while we're here as well, you can see they haven't really done the best job of deburring some of the holes around the intake, so we're also going to try to sort that out. This style of intake manifold, they also have the coolant from the head run through the side of the intake manifold here and then flow back to the thermostat. You can choose to block these off or just run a fitting and a line through to there, but I am just gonna leave that for now as I don't think I'm going to use it and I don't think there's a need for me to block it up. On the bottom side of the intake manifold, just behind the throttle body, they give you these barbs to tap in for vacuum, but obviously these are very small barbs. So what I did was I welded up the two holes that were here, and I'm gonna drill and thread in two bungs here for vacuum, or barbs for vacuum. Another thing people complain about is the poor casting and finish, as this is a very cheap intake manifold, so I'm gonna try and port these out a little bit if I can to pretty much match the gasket. You can also go ahead and port out this front section as well. Other than this few minor issues, this intake manifold is really solid and it looks great for the price that I've paid for. Just quickly, I drilled out all the ports. Up next, we're going to be drilling our MAF sensor port. So for that hole there, I drilled it out with a 10.5mm drill bit, and now my MAF sensor fits in there nice and snug. Next, I'm drilling out the holes for my vacuum bungs or barbs. So the barbs I picked are a metric thread. They usually come in a 3/8 BSP or MPT thread, but I decided to go with a metric one as it's a lot easier to find a tap. Now I've got the vacuum barbs in, we can get on with porting out the intake. So I've gone ahead and lined up the intake manifold gasket. As you can see, there's a bit of excessive metal around here. So what we're going to do is port these out a little bit and smooth any imperfections out. So what I'll do is I'll get a marker pen and I'll just mark around this gasket here, and then we'll grind it off. So I've successfully ported these out just enough. I've left a little bit down the bottom just in case. I also went around and just smoothed all of that out so you get the better flow and less resistance with the air. Up next is just touching up on the center feed part. So I've pretty much just finished die grinding all of the intake manifold. I'm very happy with the way it came out, with all the ports looking very clean now. Up next is installing the oversized throttle body. I believe this is a 72mm one. It does have an idle air control valve plate for it, so if you wanted to run that, you can. It's a different setup with this intake manifold to work with this. So the idle air control valve won't actually work if you use this throttle body with this kind of intake manifold. So I went and got a plate to block it off. I also put in these two little bungs in there just to make it all neat and proper. It also comes with the throttle cable bracket. So with this design as well, it fits multiple different intake manifolds with the overlaid holes. Depending on what kind of style or intake manifold you have, you can choose between whatever you want. Compared to the old one, the diameter of the intake is a lot bigger on the newer one. Also, this is a drive-by-wire, so it's electronic controlled, and it has some unneeded vacuum ports, which I don't need on the throttle body. Most of the K-series come out of drive-by-wire, and I just prefer having the cable throttle body, as I don't really need to run cruise control, and you get the direct response through a cable. Also, the EG supports cable only. Otherwise, you have to get the drive-by-wire pedals to go with the drive-by-wire throttle body. Now let's start fitting all the parts onto the throttle body, and then the throttle body onto the intake manifold. But yeah, just before I get any further, explaining about the idle air control valve. The idle air control valve is used for aircon, power steering, etc. So when your aircon comes on, your idle needs to bump up, as well as the car's going to stall. So what the idle air control valve does, it bypasses through the throttle body. It goes out into the intake manifold, so you don't actually have to open up the throttle body. And because this is a cable, you would have to have some way for your pedals to push down for your idle to bump up, so this does it for you. But because I don't have power steering or aircon, the idle air control valve is not needed. And if I was to get an idle air control valve for this vehicle, they cost a lot for a genuine part. So I'm very lucky that I'm not running all that stupid gear, and all I need is a blank off plate. So to connect the throttle body to the intake manifold, I got given a thermal gasket. It's like a plastic gasket, and it's flexible, obviously, and it's for keeping intake temps down. So there's less heat transfer through the manifold and the throttle body, or from the head as well. So I'll be fitting this. Also from JDM Yard in Australia, I got a thermal gasket for the intake manifold itself to keep the temps down again. Up next is adding some sensors. We're going to add the map sensor and the TPMS sensor, the throttle position sensor. I've gone with a Honda 4-bar map sensor. This one is able to hold up to 4 bars of boost for it to read. And then I went and bought a TPMS sensor from Elusive Racing. I bought a lot of parts off them, so hopefully this one is as reliable as the other parts. Now that these sensors are on and everything's done on the bench here, we can now move across and put the whole thing on the engine. And it's finally on. After all that, it's finally on, and I'm extremely happy with it. It actually looks absolutely insane on the car. I didn't expect it to look like this. It looks a lot different on like people's pictures and on people's videos and pictures on the internet, and I'm absolutely like in shock. It looks so good. We ran out of time to start with the fuel system, with the fuel rail injectors and the lines. I'm also still waiting on a few parts for that as well. So in the next episode, we'll be covering over the fuel system. So if you're new here, please subscribe. I love you guys so much, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.